also use vinyl charcoal, compressed charcoal, whatever you want. And here is some ink. So I'm going to bring in, I'm going to make a bold move here and just bringing Sharpie marker in. So this is what takes it to the mixed media technique. Whenever you bring in materials that are not paint, you don't want to get paint on your Sharpie, that will ruin it. So try to wait until the paint is dry. But I really love mixed media. I'm a huge fan. I do it all the time. I think that it is incredibly relaxing and therapeutic, and I think that it allows you to get marks and layering that you just can't get any other way. So I highly recommend trying mixed media, and I'm just playing here. So that is me adding the ink. I added charcoal, and now I would like to add in some oil pastels. I'm a huge fan of oil pastels. I think that they are just an incredible tool. And oil pastels are very messy in a wonderful way. They are very vibrant, and they go wonderfully over acrylic paint or next to acrylic paint or with acrylic paint. And oil pastels can also be put in with oil paints and watercolors, and they do not get ruined if they mix with wet paint. If you do that, it's okay. So this paint right here is wet and it's okay. Oh, and I just covered up the part that I didn't want to. That's okay. So you can really do a lot with oil pastels. I'm a huge fan of bringing oil pastels into mixed media work. Look at that. Oh, just love it. Okay. So there's mixed media. You can bring in anything, literally anything that you can find around the house, out in the street, at the store, whatever you want to bring in for mixed media, that is that technique. So the next one is out of the tube. You've seen me do that already. Out of the tube is literally what it sounds like. You take the paint, you open it up, and you squeeze the paint straight out of the tube and right onto the painting. And I love it so much. I do it all the time. And that will also lead me to showing you palette knife, which I did bring a palette knife in before. Palette knife is, you can get plastic ones, and you can also get metal ones. They come in all shapes and sizes. I have way too many palette knives. You could use butter knives, you could use spoons. It's just this scraping technique with the paint. So I'm going to, from that out of the tube squeeze, I'm going to pull this up so that you can see what the palette knife can do. It's a totally different mark than the paintbrush, which I love, and I really like how it can pick up paint in that way. So you can scrape paint away. Oh, I'm going to bring some of this paint down over this piece of paper. So, yeah, okay. So you can scrape paint away. You can use it to do that sgraffito technique like I showed you earlier. And then the leftover paint that you have, you can bring that in, bring it down, bring it over. It's just so awesome. I'm a huge fan of the palette knife. You can paint anything with a palette knife. I once painted an entire portrait of Janis Joplin with a palette knife, and that was my first palette knife painting of a portrait, and I really enjoyed it. So really anything that you can paint with a brush, you can do with a palette knife. And it's pretty amazing. But you can get all kinds of different textures and mark making from it as well. Not only can you do absolutely any image with a palette knife that you can do with a brush, but you can get very unique marks as well. So from the palette knife, I wanted to show you sponging. I don't have a sponge. I have a towel with me. I don't have any sponges. I use washcloths to wash my dishes. So I wanted to show you sponging, but I'm going to do it through a towel, so you can use a wet or dry sponge. I'm going to show you both. So whenever you do the dry sponge, so pretend this is a sponge, you take it and you dab it onto the paint, and then you can move that paint with the sponge, and it creates a really cool texture. That's with the dry. Now you can also wet it. So I'm putting that towel in some water and squeeze it a little bit, unless you want it to be not squeezed. And you can do the same thing, but it makes it more soft. So it's like the difference between like the hard edge and the soft edge. Whenever you wet the sponge, it allows for a gentler mark, if you can see that like that. So very hard edge with the dry brush, and then much softer with the wet dry sponge, wet sponge, not brush. So there's that, the sponging technique. That was 19 and 20. Now the 21st technique is color mixing. Ugh, my favorite. Okay, so I'm going to put some, let's put some white right here. And let's put some brilliant blue right there. And some vivid lime green. So my hope then with these three colors, that would make a light blue-green. And so I put them on the painting. You can put those, of course, on your palette. I'm putting it straight out of the tube onto there. That just really love doing that. You can use a wet brush or a dry brush, and you can start mixing your colors. So you can, with the color mixing technique, the point is to mix the colors on the painting. So you see the difference here is you want to mix your colors on your painting. So even if this is on your palette, you want to bring the colors from your palette to the surface and mix on your surface. So you can move it, and up here I'm going to not bring white in there, because when you do this, you can allow some of it to be unmixed, so you can get some really cool textures. So whenever you do that, it can be very smooth, very blended, it can be more rough, it could be in between. So that's the difference between mixing it on the palette and mixing it on the surface. And then you could bring other colors into it as well as you're moving along, as I tend to do. I just love painting so much. Okay, I digress. Focus. Okay, so the next one is scumbling. So I'm going to do that with this brush right here. So scumbling is where you have it's almost like dabbing, but it's like this banana shape motion. So you take the paint and you do this back and forth motion, like moving it back and forth like this, but you want to move your wrist up and down, or I'm sorry, side to side, like a banana almost. And it can create a really good blending movement. So if you're blending something, it can blend it in a different motion as you would do smooth shading. It's almost like an action of blending, and it can create a really cool texture. So see the difference between there and there. It creates a cool texture. It's very it's full of motion, the scumbling technique. That's SCUMBLING. And then underpainting. Underpainting is another technique, and actually a lot of people might consider this an underpainting. And underpainting is the first layer of paint. So say I called this my underpainting because I wanted to strictly cover the surface with one layer of paint. So if I were to look at this as an underpainting, my first layer of paint, I would maybe want to continue to fill in these spots that are still the white raw canvas, because whenever you're doing an underpainting, typically, not only is it the first layer of paint, but it typically covers the raw surface. So if you wanted to end up covering that up, you can. It's totally fine. If you want to fill in these white parts here, you get the gist. So it's almost like, I actually have this painting right here to show you. This is what I would consider an underpainting. It's one layer of paint covering the whole surface, and then I will layer on top of it. That's what an underpainting is, the first layer of paint covering the whole surface, and then you build up the painting from that. And that is very subjective, honestly. It's, well, I could get into that, but painting is subjective for sure. I think that that is one of those things. And for underpainting, with that, you can also do glazing, or I'm sorry, blocking in colors. So with that, as one way to do an underpainting is doing blocking in colors. So say I want this shape to be red. So consider this to be my underpainting, and then I decide that I want it to be a different color. So I'm going to block in that shape with a layer of paint that emphasizes I want that shape to be that color. So blocking in colors is very much what it sounds like. You are blocking in the areas that you want to be that color. And then you can build up the layers of paint. Maybe you add value, maybe you add texture, maybe you add different colors to it. But blocking in color is typically where you're getting, it could be in place of the underpainting. It could be on top of the underpainting, but it is where you are getting the gist down for where you want your colors to be. Or it might be a finished painting, who knows? So that is the next technique, and then another one I wanted to show you is glazing. So glazing is typically done with, I'm going to use a flat brush. Glazing is where you put a very almost water-thin layer of paint down over top of one. It can help create form, it can help create create shadows. It can transform a space to push it to the background or to bring it to the foreground. But what you do is you have a color and you want it to be almost translucent, or you do want it to be translucent, I'm sorry. You want it to be translucent to the point where it is almost as thin as water, but you have just a little bit of paint in there. So see, I'm adding more and more water to it, and this I am doing on my palette. So I have just a little bit of paint in with some water, and I'm going to glaze this area to push it backwards. So I'm going to put this thin layer of that darker blue This is glazing. This is where you can transform a space so you see how it instantly pushed it into the background. Because it was a bright saturated blue, it came forward, but with that glaze, it got pushed back, that darker glaze. Now, whenever I do a glaze, I do two directions to smooth it. So I did diagonally to the left, and then I pulled downwards diagonally to the right. I highly recommend doing that if you are doing glazing. I find that it really helps me smooth it out. And then you can, choose to glaze any part that you'd like. It's really up to you. So that's glazing. And a really fun one is the action splatter. So this is known from Jackson Pollock. Action painting. My kids love this stuff. So what you do is you take a brush that maybe it's wet or dry, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to put some paint directly on, and I'm going to just kind of dab it down. And you can either use latex paint and dribble it over, or you can do this technique where you flick it. I'm going to use white. My heavy body paints are not the best for this. Okay, so I'm going to tell you right now that there's a reason why Jackson Pollock used, let's see. There's a reason why Jackson Pollock used a latex paints, because they are much thinner than these out of the tube. Yeah, this is not working. But you can see that. So action painting. Okay, dabbing. Okay. So anyways, action painting is where, let me try this one more time. Come on. If you get, okay, there we go. So if you get the brush wet a little bit with this thicker paint, it will work. There we go. Okay. Oops, I got some on the window. I'm going to have to clean that up. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to show you is the pour. So if you, oh boy, oh no, I just got so much more paint on there. Okay, so if you put water in a cup and a little bit of paint, the ratio of paint to water is up to you. It depends what consistency, what opacity, what transparency you want your pour to be. But a pour is made of water with paint, and you do what it sounds like. You pour it onto your painting, and it is so much fun and so messy. I love it. I used to do this all the time with huge artworks. And what you do is you have the pour, and you can use it with any size cup, any color, any ratio of water to paint. It just depends what you want. And you can pour the paint onto your piece however you want it. And I'm not going to get totally crazy with this because I want to preserve some of this, but you could pour it over the whole painting and then paint over it again. Pours can also act as underpaintings if you want, and if you want it to move, you can just turn your painting up and down, sideways, circular motion. It's your call. You can turn it totally on its side, let it drip all the way down. That's a pour. Let's let it go this way too. Oh yeah, that's it. There you go. You have yourself 27 different painting techniques, 27 different acrylic painting techniques. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you have so much fun trying all of these techniques out. I'm a huge fan of acrylic paint because I feel like you can just do so much with it. And there are hundreds more techniques that I didn't show you. I just chose my favorite 27. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you next time.